slump forward, and they have long arms. They also tend to be very weak to sunlight. Uruk-hai, on the other hand, they're tall, they stand straight, and typically they can function in sunlight, though they still hate it. Now, to answer the question of where orcs came from, we're going to have to take bits and pieces from different writings of Tolkien, as the question itself doesn't always have a straightforward answer, and thus I think by establishing a strong foundation, it's good as we can build upon it. So to start, I'd like to talk about one of Tolkien's writings, where he said that evil in Lord of the Rings wasn't capable of independent creation, and by this he means that evil couldn't create, it could only corrupt and twist that which already existed. Now this gives us a lot of information, and it allows us to establish that orcs in Middle-earth weren't created from nothing, but instead they were a twisted form of life. So Tolkien wrote the history of Middle-earth throughout his lifetime, and thus his works often have more than one explanation for a question. Thus, to get past this, I'll list the potential answers and we can go through them together. So the first explanation is that Morgoth, who was the first Dark Lord and Sauron's master, had kidnapped elves and tortured them into orcs. Now in some of Tolkien's later writings, he suggests that Morgoth might have also kidnapped men and tortured them by similar means into orcs. The second explanation is that orcs always existed, but at first they were a soulless, mindless beast. Morgoth then discovered them, and in them he saw the potential to make the perfect minion, and thus he twisted them to serve his purpose, and he taught them and transformed them into a weapon of his will. Now this is encouraged by the fact that once the Dark Lord is defeated, the orcs tend to become confused and they're usually easily beaten by the forces of good. And we see this both when Morgoth and Sauron were defeated. And this indicates that without the will of a Dark Lord pushing them, the orcs revert back to their old form, a mindless beast, a confused beast. The final explanation also involves Morgoth. Now, Morgoth was initially one of the Valar, who were sort of gods in Middle-earth. When he turned evil, he corrupted many other spirits who served the Valar. Now, some of these spirits were great spirits such as Sauron and the Balrogs, but there were also many lesser spirits among them, and it's believed that some of these lesser spirits might have taken the form of orcs. So that covers where the first orcs came from, but what about the future generations? So now we must ask, did the orcs breed? Were there female orcs? Were they cloned? Did they hatch? So in Tolkien's written works, no female orcs are ever mentioned. However, in the Silmarillion he states that orcs lived and multiplied in the same way that the children of Ilúvatar did, and thus this suggests that they did breed and therefore female orcs existed. In the books, we also see certain orcs having a relation of sorts. For example, in The Hobbit, we see an orc called Bolg, who is the son of Azog, or Gollum describing what it's like to have eaten a young goblin, which suggests that, goblin parents, younglings, children, etc. Now, on this point, Tolkien did actually once confirm that female orcs existed, and he had written, and I quote, "There must have been orc women, but in stories that seldom if ever see the orcs except as soldiers of armies in the service of evil lord, we naturally would not learn much about their lives, and thus not much was known." There is one last point I'd like to make, and that is that in the books there are some theories that Saruman might have bred orcs with men. Now this crossbreeding is believed to have resulted in Uruk-hai and half-orcs, and this is why Uruk-hai are said to be more resistant to light and typically smarter and stronger than the average orc. Half-orcs are described as having a human build